Hello and welcome to the Empress podcast. I am your host, Jessica, known in the online space as Jess the Empress. I started this podcast to help you be present with yourself, cope with chaos, and simplify your life. I do this by combining psychology, behavioral science, and the tarot. I have a background in mental health, specifically a master's in clinical social work from USC, and I'm a professional tarot reader. So get ready to have a nurturing, creative, and empowering experience with me as we use practical magic. Hey, hi, hello. Welcome back to the podcast. It's your girl, Jess. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. I really appreciate you being here. Let's go ahead and dive right in. October has a very interesting vibe. It's a powerful one for sure. But we're talking about generational trauma and family dynamics this month. And also the courage to choose a different path for yourself, which I think is really important. Probably the most important thing for my audience to understand is that you can have a different outcome in your life than what you've seen your family live through. Our main focus card this month is the 10 of Pentacles in the reverse position. Okay, she literally flew out of the deck as I was shuffling. So I knew we were off to an interesting start with it being in the reverse position. There's a lot of things that the 10 of Pentacles reversed can mean, and I'll talk about that. But the big energy that I'm picking up for our reading is about that family legacy, but it being in, that dysfunctional type of family legacy. The challenge card that we have is the Queen of Wands in the reverse position. So this is, again, something where we're looking at shadows and struggles. We're looking at control and manipulation and burnout. And all of these things happened within dysfunctional family systems. But then unless we're working towards changing that particular cycle, we will create toxicity and control, manipulation and burnout towards ourselves. And then, of course, towards the people around us if we don't do our healing work. And then the lesson card, what we're moving toward, is the 7 of Pentacles in the upright position. This teaches us about patience, long-term vision, and the slow but steady work of healing and growth. And patience is necessary for healing. We'll talk about why that is, but what we'll also talk about is how to cultivate the strength to plant new seeds in your life's garden, even when the soil feels yucky and damaged. Let's begin with our main focus card, the 10 of Pentacles reversed. In its upright position, this card can represent resources, family legacy, generational wealth, which is also material and emotional, traditions that are passed down, and the security of belonging to something larger than just yourself. It can also point to hard work that is worth doing. When we get it in reverse, like we did for this month, it tells a very different story. The 10 of Pentacles reversed speaks to the misuse of those resources, a disrupted family system, broken traditions, financial instability, and perhaps most painfully, the absence of the emotional inheritance that should have nourished us. Instead of receiving love, security, and healthy patterns from our families, we've inherited trauma, dysfunction, and only survival mechanisms that we are actually outgrowing. From the tarot perspective, this card represents the shadow side of the family, those painful dynamics that get passed down like just heirlooms you don't want, emotional unavailability, financial anxiety that creates scarcity mindsets, addictions. The 10 of Pentacles reverse can also represent when the family has become a source of drain rather than strength. So it doesn't always have to be as dramatic as what I'm stating it, but I find that last statement I made really does apply across the board when the family becomes a source of draining instead of a source of strength. From a mental health standpoint, what we're talking about in this context is intergenerational trauma. It's a phenomenon where the psychological and emotional effects of trauma are passed down from one generation to the next. I remember learning about this in grad school, but there are even some kids that are born with PTSD because their mothers were in high stress environments like war zones while the kiddos were in utero. So they didn't even have to see any type of behavior in order to have PTSD. It is what they inherited from their mom before they were even born. I'm going to jump into sharing some resources, but before I do, just know that there is a document attached to this in the show notes that has all of my resources. So feel free to go through that, click on the links, do a deeper dive. But there is some 2024 research from the Frontiers in Psychology, and they show that intergenerational trauma operates through complex mechanisms, including attachment relationships, family communication patterns, and then epigenetic changes that can affect stress responses in offspring before they're born. And what I think is really important here, and if you've ever done any type of, family trauma work, you'll realize that this has less to do with blaming your family system and more about understanding how a dysfunctional system impacts you. So this isn't about pointing fingers, because the reality is it is having an impact on you. And truly, you're wasting time if you're just blaming other people instead of taking the time to focus on your healing plan. It's story time. I'm going to give you a little vignette. Let's talk about Sarah. Let's say that she's feeling totally anxious about money despite having a stable job. So all of her bills are paid. She even has some money going into savings. But when money comes up, she feels a lot of intensity and anxiety. If she were my client, I would do a deep dive with her family history. We might discover that her grandmother had lived through the Great Depression. Her mother had then grown up with deep financial anxiety, and Sarah inherited this scarcity mindset even though her actual circumstances are secure. The Ten of Pentacles reversed perfectly captures her experience, a family legacy of fear around security that no longer is relevant to her, but it's still controlling her life, right? Let's say every time she checked her bank account, she would get anxious. When she would go to spend money, she would feel like she couldn't breathe. Or her mind would be buzzing with, well, make sure you check this bank account. And what about this for later? And oh my gosh, don't spend too much. That type of mental noise can also be a symptom of anxiety. So when the Ten of Pentacles reversed appears, it's asking all of us this month to examine, what have I inherited from my family that isn't serving me? What patterns am I unconsciously perpetuating? And most importantly, what legacy do I want to create instead? You have the power to break generational curses. And this is what it takes. It takes reflecting on the patterns that you have inherited and intentionally choosing what you want to do about them and how you want to live your life. The challenge card is that Queen of Wands reversed. So I mentioned some of those shadow traits that she has. Like I said, they all come out of a dysfunctional family system. So you're not wrong or bad or broken for having those traits. You inherited them, but you don't want them any longer, right? So the Queen of Wands upright, when we get her, we love her. She is confident, she is passionate, she is creative, she is nurturing. She knows her worth and she leads with an open-hearted warmth. Reversed, okay? She's, again, controlling, manipulative, jealous, burned out. In the context of family dysfunction, the Queen of Wands reversed represents how we can become the very patterns that we're trying to escape. When we grow up in toxic environments, we often develop these survival mechanisms that were necessary then, but now they've become harmful in our adult relationships. And essentially, we've outgrown them, but we might become controlling because we've never felt safe. We might be manipulative because we never understood how to have direct communication, or direct communication wasn't safe. We might stay in states of burnout because we learned to give and give endlessly without ever receiving. Kiddos from dysfunctional families usually adopt these specific roles, and these roles help them cope with how they really feel, but it also makes them limit their authentic expression. And if I share some of these roles, you might, kind of recognize yourself in some of them. So the hero is the kiddo that's always trying to be perfect. They take a lot of unnecessary responsibility and try to keep the peace. And they try to bring, a lot of pride to themselves and their family. But how they do this is through perfectionism. And then that ends up creating a lot of anxiety. The scapegoat, this is the kiddo that is acting out. And what they're doing by that is they're drawing attention away from the family problems and away from the family drama. But this kiddo often carries a lot of shame and typically is the problem child. Even as an adult, you'll see them being the problem adult. And the lost kiddo, this is the one that is usually avoiding and withdrawing from conflict. They usually become invisible. They struggle a lot with self worth and they have a difficulty expressing what their needs are because they have felt unseen for so long that they usually have an inner belief that their needs just don't matter and that they don't matter. And then the caretaker. This is managing everybody else's emotions, becoming hyper responsible for other people's well beings. And this always leads to burnout and a lot of times resentment. And remember, these are protective roles that serve anyone who steps into them in their childhood. And unless we do that reflective and healing work, they become the Queen of Wands in the reverse position, all those controlling and manipulating tactics. And we do this because we don't know how to feel safe in our bodies. And maybe we haven't had the experience of feeling safe with another person. And so we just default to those tactics, those survival coping skills. And like the 10 of Pentacles reversed, there's an invitation when we see the Queen of Wands reversed. She's becoming our teacher. She's showing us that when we're operating from wound rather than wisdom, we become toxic to ourselves. Maybe you recognize yourself trying to control outcomes because chaos feels really terrifying, or giving so much that you burn out because saying no was never an option in your family. The Shadow Queen asks us, how am I unconsciously perpetuating the very patterns that I want to escape from? Where am I operating from fear rather than love? And what would it look like to reclaim my authentic power instead of defensive control? I'm going to share a story that blends both of these vibes together. If you've listened to any of my other podcasts, you know that I love a garden analogy. That's what we're going to go with today. So imagine that you inherit a garden from your family. On the surface, she's looking beautiful. Okay. Space. There's tons of potential. There's even some flowers blooming. So you're stoked. You get out into this garden and then you discover that the soil is messed up. It's contaminated. Previous generations have dumped a bunch of, let's say, toxic waste onto this soil. They've planted an invasive species and they kind of neglected basic care. It turns out those flowers blooming are actually weeds and they're even struggling themselves. And so underneath the surface, the roots are super damaged. This is exactly what it's like if you inherit a dysfunctional family system. You want to create something beautiful. You want healthy relationships. You want emotional stability and authentic connection, but you're working with contaminated soil. So the Queen of Wands reverse teaches us when we realize that the soil is toxic, when we're being called out, okay, our immediate impulse might be to try and control everything. We might over fertilize. We might be constantly planting new things or transplanting plants from one side to the other. We might try and force growth. And we're doing it out of this place of desperateness, right? Because we want something healthy to grow, but the conditions are unhealthy. So the math isn't mathing. I've lived in this metaphor in my own life. So I grew up in a family system where emotional expression wasn't really safe. I learned to be hyper vigilant about everyone's moods, and I was trying to control the emotional climate so that other people wouldn't explode. I became my family's emotional thermostat. So I would turn myself up or down to maintain some type of equilibrium. And the Queen of Wands reversed behavior that followed me into my adult relationships because I was manipulative in situations to avoid conflict, to control conversations, to prevent emotional insecurity. And then I would also burn myself out trying to manage everybody else's feelings. So I've been there. I am not talking from a pedestal. This is literally lived experience. And the 10 of Pentacles reversed was, some evidence for me that I've had to reflect on as years go by about the different people pleasing patterns that I had. And I also had to check in with my fear of abandonment. And this is our humanity. Me telling you that I have these flaws is just like, okay, cool. Because everybody has these flaws. Everybody has these parts of themselves that they're working on. And so I hope that you don't feel like you can't look at what you've got going on underneath the surface and deep into that soil. Because the cool thing is, once you do that, you then get to move into the biggest state of empowerment, which is, again, going deep into that soil and uprooting anything you don't like. And that is like a game changer. I want that for you. But it took me a long time to realize that I had controlling behaviors. They were protective, and there were times when they did work with certain people that I did need protection from, even in my adult years. But they weren't letting me be my most authentic self. And I wasn't getting like that deep, really nourishing type of connection. I was just busy, not tending to my own roots, making myself busy with a whole bunch of other stuff. And then I also realized that I could plant new things. I was the one that didn't have to be toxic. I decided that I wanted to not be like the family that I grew up in the sense of their emotional immaturity. I wanted to be the one that could understand myself and understand other people. And in a lot of ways, I didn't want people to feel the way I felt growing up. I didn't want people to feel like they couldn't be around me and that they had to walk on eggshells and that they had to be so preoccupied with my mood that they couldn't just be who they were. And then that's when I chose patience over micromanaging control. And that's when I chose understanding and vulnerability over manipulation. And that's when I chose boundaries over burnout, that 7 of Pentacles energy. So let's go ahead and explore some of the reframes that can transform our relationship with family dysfunction and our own shadow behaviors. These are evidence-based shifts that will literally rewire your neural pathways. Okay. So reframe number 1. Do not tell yourself, I'm broken because of my family. Okay. You have to speak truth to yourself. And the truth is, you're not broken. You got some things that don't serve you. Sometimes you're a little bit messy. Okay. Who isn't? What you want to tell yourself is, I'm aware of patterns that I didn't choose, but I can change. So when we're expanding beyond a definitive statement, this is a growth mindset. Okay, so a closed mindset is I'm broken because of my family. A growth mindset is I'm aware of my patterns that I didn't choose, but I can change. You're telling yourself that you have the power to change things that you inherited. Beautiful. I love that. I had a clinical supervisor who told me awareness breeds awareness. And I have found that to be true. When we shift out of victimhood into awareness, we activate what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. This is our brain's ability to form new neural pathways and connections. So you're not broken, you're awakening to new patterns that were adaptive into your family system, but they don't serve you. And it doesn't feel good to awaken to those things, but I'm going to tell you it's worth it. It's worth it to go through the discomfort. Because then you get to experience what real power is. And you also get to experience joy and accountability, which is tricky, but it's possible. But let's shift into the framework, the second one. You don't want to tell yourself, I'm just like my toxic parent. Okay. Yeah, you might be a little bit, but you're not exactly the same. You're not just like them because, you're fundamentally a different human being. Like you are your own entity. You are not them. And so you have to reframe that and say, okay, I'm again recognizing I inherited some patterns, but I'm choosing differently. So again, you're starting to plant the seeds that you have choices. You need to keep telling yourself that you have choices. The reason people get stuck is because they don't believe they have choices. They don't even tell themselves that they have a choice. They tell themselves they're stuck, so they don't choose anything. The Queen of Wands reversed is not a life sentence, I promise. The shadow parts of us, they can be transformed. There are some studies that show individuals who recognize their inherited trauma are more likely to break cycles of dysfunction. So this is where awareness breeds awareness plays in. the better you get at recognizing where your patterns are, there'll always be a little something to dig up because a garden, you don't just like, till the soil once and then you're like, okay, I'm good. It's an active thing like love. Love is an action. You show up every day to put in the work, the nurturing and necessary work. So when you catch yourself, being controlling or manipulative or burned out, you just have to pause and you need to ask yourself, okay, is this coming from my authentic self or is this maybe coming from one of my family patterns? Number three, this comes in a lot with my clients in particular. There's this theme of like families should be unconditionally supportive to each other. But the reframe is that healthy boundaries are an act of love. So there are boundaries that your parents should have put up in order to protect you, and they didn't. And that is why you inherited toxic patterns. So when you put up boundaries in your relationships, it might feel uncomfortable because you've never done it before. You were never modeled how to do it. But the 10 of Pentacles reversed sometimes means that accepting that our families of origin, they may have never been able to provide the emotional safety that we needed. And I say never because many of us carry childhood fantasies of a happy ending, that some miraculous transformation is going to take place, and that, people will just magically change overnight. But there's some research from PMC that shows setting boundaries with dysfunctional family members is essential for mental health recovery. In some cases, cutting them off is going to be the best thing you can do for your recovery. Might sound harsh, but the reality is that there are types of people out there that will never respect your boundaries. You will become incredibly exhausted every single time you interact with them. They will do nothing but wreak havoc and drama into your life and on your nervous system, and also negatively impact the ones that you love, your spouses and your kiddos and your friends. And it can be a wild ride. I've seen it far too many times than I should, but it's just, what are you going to do? Because the thing with boundaries, it's like you're loving yourself enough to create the safety that your family couldn't provide for you. And then when you do that, you're so much more capable of showing what healthy boundaries look like, because you're going to teach the people around you that you're not going to put up with toxicity. So you're going to be the first person in your family, in your system, to model what that looks like. So your kiddos are going to learn from you, which is an amazing thing. Your friends are going to see that from you. Your spouse is going to see that from you. That is breaking generational curses. The fourth one also shows up in my clients, which is, I should be over this by now. And I'm going to tell you, that is not a helpful narrative. What we need to say to ourselves instead is healing generational trauma. It takes time and it takes patience. This directly connects to that 7 of Pentacles, our lesson card. Healing family dysfunction is not a sprint. There's no like fast way, fast track to get over things. But when you have long-term patience, you actually reduce your depression and anxiety related to your family trauma because you have a clearer perspective. You're not falling into that false hope and into those, sort of miraculous mindsets, which it keeps people stuck. And really, there's no point that you're like ever over it in the context that you're like, pain free or trigger free from your family trauma. It's lifelong work. And so when you embrace the fact that it's lifelong work, you make peace with it. And peace is like so beautiful because you can, I don't want to say like relax around it, but you're not going to get as worked up and you're not going to feel as hopeless. If you understand that this is just a part of life, you can embrace it. From a tarot perspective, these reframes represent that alchemical transformation that happens when we work consciously with our cards. So when we get the 10 of Pentacles reversed, it is an opportunity to create new traditions. And I think that is so beautiful because if you don't like what you've inherited, like that ugly heirloom, you can throw it out. And you don't even have to feel bad because you know that that's the choice that you're making for you and the life that you want to live. You have one life. Do not carry things that do not serve you. The Queen of Wands reversed is an invitation to reclaim your power. It's saying, hey, you're giving it away. You're letting it slip into the lower version of yourself, the low hanging fruit. There's a higher standard for you that you have, that you want to reach. It's going to take some work to get there. So these cards together, they're preparing us for the patience and the vision that's required to plant those new seeds. And the reason these reframes are so powerful is there's such a thing as post-traumatic growth. So you can go through trauma and grow afterward. Amazing. After family trauma, people actually end up getting better at emotional intelligence, stronger boundaries, and more authentic relationships than people who never experienced dysfunction in the first place. How freaking cool is that? There is so much hope in that research. There is so much hope in those facts. If you want that to be true for you, it's possible. You just got to work for it. The key is approaching our healing with patience and not forcing things. Let's dive into 4 concrete and actionable solutions that address the family dysfunction, okay, and the shadow behaviors while incorporating that 7 of Pentacles patience vibe. First thing, the Family Pattern Audit. I did touch on this a little bit in the questions, but I'm going to go deeper here. This is a more structured approach to identifying those patterns, and you're not going to get lost in that blame. Or if you feel shame, you're at least going to be able to distance yourself from it, like the toxic shame that can come up when we do this work. You're going to create 3 columns, okay? Column 1, patterns I inherited. Column 2, how these show up in my life. And column 3, what I want to create instead. Sometimes having this on a piece of paper, it helps us. When we write it down, we absorb it better. It's a great strategy. Let's go back to Sarah as that example from that vignette. So she inherited that financial anxiety from her grandmother, because her grandmother was in the Depression era. That's clearly traumatic for her. But she inherited that financial anxiety. It shows up because she feels anxious about spending money and she never feels secure, even though there's evidence of the fact that she is secure. But what she wants to create instead is a conscious relationship with money based on her actual circumstances. And she wants to feel that connection of safety to her circumstances. And one of the keys in this investigation is having like a scientist mind about it, in the sense that you're an observer, you're coming at it with curiosity. You're not coming at it to like say, who's responsible for ruining my life? Like we gotta be cool about it. The second actionable solution is the boundary garden practice. When you think about this, if you've got boundaries that are creating healthy soil for your emotional garden, then this means that you need to know what you're putting in your garden. Think of boundaries as creating healthy soil for your garden. This practice is going to involve 3 different types of boundaries that are going to help your soil stay healthy. The first one is physical boundaries. So this might be, limiting time spent at a toxic family environment. You're only spending 20 minutes there for Thanksgiving. They can be pissed, but you can be okay. The second is emotional boundaries. So this is not taking responsibility for others' feelings. And this applies when you're not directly involved in the emotional impact that they're experiencing. For example, can you hurt someone's feelings by lashing out at them? Yeah, 100%. And when you do that, you should apologize because you're being an asshole and you should work on repairing things. But what you're not responsible for is walking on eggshells to prevent emotional explosions from other people because, they're having a bad day or they're moody or whatever. And then the last one, the third thing, is mental boundaries. This is choosing which family stories and beliefs you accept. And boundaries are not this thing that you set once and then you're like, okay, I'm good to go. It's, again, this garden that you're tending to. This is going to require daily attention. But with that 7 of Pentacles, we're talking about long-term growth and sustainability. Okay, this is huge. So the practice is all about setting one small boundary a week. So maybe this is not discussing your career with a parent that's really critical. This could look like limiting a phone call to 15 minutes. If we look at the Queen of Wands reversed, her impulse is to either totally avoid a situation or to control a situation. But we want to choose the middle path and we want to set healthy limits. And again, the caveat being here, if you have to avoid in a sense of like fully disconnect for your protection, by all means do so. The third action is having patience for these triggers. So when family dynamics trigger you, because they will, that control, the manipulation, and the burnout is going to happen. But when you notice it happening, you want to cultivate a practice of taking some deep breaths and just noticing where that trigger is in your body. Where do you feel activated? And then asking yourself, okay, is this an authentic response or is this a family pattern? Is this old and generational? Once you've asked yourself that question, you can then choose one small aligned action with who you want to be. Do you want to be the person that continues to stay in that trigger and do nothing and think there's no choice, which is what the family pattern has been? Or do you want to align with an authentic response? And what is that authentic response? What would you like to do instead? You'll have better emotional regulation over time when you practice this, I promise. The Seven of Pentacles is like blood, sweat, and tears. So you are rewiring decades of neural pathways. Like you inherited ways of thinking and feeling. So yeah, of course, change isn't going to happen overnight. You got to be realistic. And that actually goes into the fourth solution. Because there's a choice here, you want to keep asking yourself, what new traditions do I want to create? So don't just sit there and be like, I have a broken family system, I can't do anything. Look at your values, reflect on what they are, and then say, what's a new tradition that would align with this value? So let's say, for example, you came from a family that like all they did was complain about everything. Maybe what you want to do is create a gratitude practice. Or maybe you had a family system where nothing was ever good enough and all the achievements were constantly minimized. What you might want to do is create celebration rituals. If your family has a pattern of being manipulative, then you might want to establish honest communication. What happens on the other side of these changes is higher life satisfaction because you're living life on your terms instead of someone else's terms. You're living life with your thoughts and your ideas and your feelings instead of living the way someone else thought and the way that those people felt. Creating new family traditions and breaking generational cycles is absolutely work that is worth it. And you might be the only one in your family that sees value in doing the work. And that's okay. You're not the only person in the world, though. You might be the only one in your family. So definitely link up with people that are like-minded. You want to surround yourself with people that are in the trenches with you because you deserve support. And if you can't get it from your family, you got to get it somewhere. And of course, I'm here for you. If you want to book a one-to-one, hit me up, find me online. Let's do that. I'll put you in the books. But I also just want to say, if you're willing to examine your family patterns and choose differently, like you're already breaking generational cycles just by looking at stuff. It takes a lot of courage. Like you're so brave for wanting to change things. I feel like the other thing too, when we get the 10 of Pentacles reversed, it's like, do not compare yourself to this silly stuff that we see online. There's no such thing as perfection. And there sure as shit isn't a such thing as perfection in a family system. Yes, there are healthy family systems, but that's not the same thing as a perfect family system. And you have everything it takes to create a healthy family system. Awareness, patience, the willingness to plant new seeds. You've got all of this in you. You're the one that is breaking the curse. And now is the perfect time for that work. Trust the process, be patient with yourself, and know that healing generational trauma is really sacred work and you can do it. Until next time, please take the best care of yourself and the best care of those you love, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.